As Reverend Coeyman lights our chalice this morning, I invite you to rise in body or spirit to speak aloud our affirmation. If you're on Zoom, please keep muted as you pick up the words in the chat line. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. For these high purposes do we unite in worship.
Well, again, a good morning to everyone. In the getting acquainted process of interim ministry, I offer what I call 3 boilerplate or grounding themes. And thus far, we've considered 2 of these: the meaning and the practice of spirituality, and the practice of covenant. That is, covenant central to a religion defined by deeds, not creeds. So today I want to bring you the 3rd grounding theme, that of shared ministry. These 3 concepts, spirituality, covenant, and shared ministry, create a foundation for building healthy communities and for defining congregational identity, which is especially important during a transitioning period. I also talk about shared ministry often, so it's important that we have common understanding of the concept. That visitor from outer space in our story was really quite impressed by the shared ministry and the shared leadership she saw on her visit to Earth. She saw how a healthy community or a system thrives on the contributions of many in that community, collaborating with and supporting the work of the person officially identified as being in charge: the coach, the director, the teacher, the minister. How do you relate to that visitor's experience? If that visitor walked into this sanctuary this morning, how would that visitor see shared ministry, shared leadership? How have you experienced ministry here today? Look around the room. Go on, look around the room. Where do you see ministers? Where do you see ministers? As in the story, many people here today are sharing their ministry right here, right now. To explore shared ministry today, let's start by reviewing what ministry means generally. The root of the word ministry means service in various contexts. When we say we minister to one another, we offer service to one another. If we think of ministry as service to congregational life in our free religion of Unitarian Universalism, indeed many people, both lay and ordained, offer ministry, because it takes many hearts and many hands in our approach to organization based on congregational polity. As expressed by the Unitarian Universalist Association, ministry happens wherever individuals, clergy and lay, embrace the belief that their good works, their volunteerism, can serve the mission and vision of their congregation, unquote. I'm moved by Gordon McKeeman's description of ministry. Perhaps you are, too. It supports this notion of service to and with others. McKeeman describes ministry as a relationship which beckons forth hidden possibilities in others, calling people to their better selves through uniting fragments and healing wounds. Ministry is not a list of tasks, and a minister is not a service provider. Instead, ministry is a mindset, a calling to touch each other's lives and bring about transformation, sometimes small, sometimes great. Ministry indeed illustrates that we need one another. Ministry is indeed sacred work. I think it helps to understand how shared ministry came about by first reviewing the history of ordained ministry. Over the centuries, religious leaders known as ministers have been called out from their communities, and that is, they've been called out by being ordained after completing particular training and personal discernment. Perhaps you've attended a ministerial ordination in the last time that you've been a UU. You know, that celebratory ritual that declares that a person is ordained as a minister. Now, in hierarchical religions, such as Catholicism, the higher the ordained minister sits in the pecking order, the closer that person is to God, or so the theory goes, at least, in hierarchical religion. Liberal religion, organized by congregational polity, has a much more egalitarian and lateral organization. Ordained ministers are more of the people, with no advantage seat closer to God. I guarantee you, I don't have a seat closer to God than you do. I guarantee you. Liberal religion is lateral rather than top-down. For centuries, Universalists and Unitarians have ordained ministers. That is, they've set aside certain among them as leaders in a lateral context. Now, in the early days, one became a minister largely through mentoring, through trial and error, rather than through structured programs of study. Hardly much more than preaching was expected of those early ministers on Sunday morning or whenever the minister happened to pass through the town. In many cases, not that weighty a job, admittedly, but then the pay was often not that great either. Literally, sometimes a chicken in a pot. Now, please don't get any ideas. Please don't change my contract to include chickens, please. And later this year, I'm going to tell you more about the first Universalist woman ordained to ministry, a woman named Lydia Jenkins, ordained in 1860, who somehow got dropped from the history books. And I'm in the process of writing Lydia's biography, so you're going to hear a lot about Lydia Jenkins as my book comes to some focus. Through the years, the categories of Unitarian Universalist ministry have expanded significantly from those origins of minister as only preacher. Today, we include ministers of religious education, pastoral care, social outreach, ministers of music, and more by these days. Also, UUs have been in the forefront in promoting ministry for women, as I just said about Lydia, she was the first woman ordained, and persons of gay, lesbian, transgender, and other previously marginalized identities. Additionally, community ministry is growing by leaps and bounds. Recently, the majority of candidates who came to the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, that is the review board for ministry, indicated that they are pursuing ministries outside of service in the parish, working in hospitals or prisons or entrepreneurial projects, working in the community rather than in the parish. In addition to these many new categories of ministry, the qualifications for ordained ministry are constantly evolving. By 2022, training in interpersonal relationships is required, as well as in church administration and in leadership in anti-oppression and anti-racism work. Much is now required of emerging ministers. And the modes of ministry are expanding. You know this yourselves. During the pandemic, we realized so many new possibilities for online ministry, remote attendance, recorded services, and so much more. Now, please understand, no ordained minister can be all things to all people. Scholars are pretty clear that Jesus did not walk on water. And I assure you, you ministers don't either. We strive to respond to the ministries we serve, but no minister is perfect. No minister is all things to all people. And no minister ever totally fulfills all the hopes and dreams that we invest in our calling. But I suggest that my colleagues in UU ministry strive to their fullest, to their sincerest, to fill the demands and the requirements of those they serve. But it's no surprise that candidates for ordained ministry are pushed and prodded from many sides to define this calling. I chose hymn 298 intentionally, Wake Now My Senses, as our closing hymn. The final verse of that speaks so strongly about this call to ministry with the words, "Wake now, my vision of ministry clear." No wonder this hymn is sung in many ordination ceremonies, as in mine back in 2005. Ministry is indeed sacred work. This is why it's important to have covenantal conversations at the start of new ministries about our shared ministries together, our mutual expectations. Here in this congregation, we will have a startup workshop on the weekend of November 12th and 13th. And the session for the entire congregation will be after the service on Sunday the 13th in the early afternoon. Stay tuned, you'll get more details about this workshop on Sunday the 13th. So from ordained ministry, how did we get to the concept of shared ministry? Shared ministry is fairly new vocabulary, but actually religious congregations of all denominations have been engaged in shared ministry sometimes for decades, sometimes even as far back as the 18th century. Shared ministry represents a shift in words more than activities. Shared ministry used to be generally referred to as volunteering. But in Unitarian Universalist circles, the phrase shared ministry came into common use in the latter part of the 20th century, especially promoted by women's circles in our denomination. It being the women who traditionally have done the bulk of the largely unacknowledged volunteering in congregations. So they wanted to change the vocabulary to give more substance to what they've been doing. UU women wanted to acknowledge the important work of laity, both women and men. Calling this work shared ministry, rather than volunteering, gave it its due importance. Think about your experiences volunteering for this congregation, or others you participated in, or any group you volunteer for. Thinking of your contributions as ministry really can change the spirit of how you give time and talents. Shared ministry varies from congregation to congregation, but indeed it's common vocabulary, not only among UUs. Shared ministry happens through many different types of connections. It happens as congregants work together, as you work together on projects. You name any of them here, social justice or worship or caring. Many, many shared ministries among you. Shared ministry also happens among staff, together as we work together, for example, preparing worship services. I'm grateful for the shared ministry among staff that I've enjoyed so far here. And shared ministry happens when congregants and staff work together, supporting one another, such as the minister and worship associates in collaboration in worship services, or the minister and the caring committee, sharing visits to shut-ins. In some ways, it seems that shared ministry is just what you do when you attend a UU church. Shared ministry is compatible with the values of free faith. Shared ministry's partnership model matches well with congregational polity, our method of organization and governance. Power with one another, not power over one another. Distributed power among the many. Acknowledging the gifts, the contributions, the skills of everyone. Shared ministry is also in tune with the democratic mindset in which liberal ministry was founded, as reflected in the fifth principle of Unitarian Universalism. I've experienced many positive results when a congregation acknowledges and practices shared ministry. Practically speaking, a mindset of shared ministry eases the load on professional staff. When congregants believe in their own capacity to carry out a job, responsibilities that might have been handled solely by staff are distributed. Shared ministry opens doors to creative ideas from the many, more creativity among the many. In shared ministry, we can also change up roles. Any of us, including the minister, can sometimes be a leader and sometimes a follower. All too often, I hear congregants express an overload of volunteering responsibilities at church as burnout. This sense of being spent, this sense of being burned, is regrettable. For church is supposed to be where we come for renewal. To go away charred and crispy just doesn't make sense. Shared ministry helps avoid burnout by encouraging us to ward off individualism and even perhaps isolation and silos we can easily fall into, thinking we can do it all by ourselves. Can you see how shared ministry is not only about getting the job done? Regarding what you do when you come here as ministry changes the spirit, from possible drudge work to spiritual practice. Activities feel less task-oriented, more gift-centered, less about a job, more about relationship. Shared ministry also helps us shift from being needs-centered with a consumerist mindset to mission-centered, serving principles, not personalities. Being mission-centered can lessen that feeling of scarcity many congregations experience. Indeed, shared ministry creates powerful relationships. When we see others through the lens of their ministries, aren't we more likely to say thank you for worship leadership, or singing in the choir, or making coffee, organizing the closets, setting up the chairs? Shared ministry is good for the world. How different a world if sharing rather than domineering were the operative model. My friends, I trust you are seeing connections then among my three grounding themes. Shared ministry develops easily when we're in covenant, that is, in promises for how we walk together. Covenants build trust as we declare how we will carry out our intentions to the best of our abilities. Practicing shared ministry in covenant with one another, shared ministry thus becomes a form of spiritual practice to help us explore those intimate and ultimate questions of life, one of the reasons we come to church. When we practice shared ministry, we experience service to that which is greater than any individual's, service in mission to the congregation, and more broadly to liberal religion. This is an honorable endeavor, because free religion, well practiced, can and does transform lives. So let's reflect one more time. Look around the room. Go on, look around the room. Where do you see ministers this morning? Look to your right, look to your left, look in front of you, look behind you. If you see someone offering or will offer or has offered shared ministry, make a point after the service to go up and tell them you appreciate their contributions, okay? Oh, wait, I forgot. Look at yourselves. Look at one more minister. I hope you're seeing a minister. Even if you're a newcomer here, or if you're an old-timer, if you were not here today sharing your presence, this would be a different community. Your being here matters. To recall words from our reading, my hope for this congregation is that all its ministries continue to open up hidden possibilities in yourselves and others. Sharing enhances the spiritual journey for each of us and vitalizes our communities. Sharing is good for the world, including outer space. In the words of Reverend Richard Gilbert, let us celebrate what we share. We are, after all, my friends, in this together. May all this be so.